It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I hope you're learning a lot from my great guests that I've had on today, because I've learned a lot from them, and you're going to learn a lot from my final guest, and that is Katherine Gorka. And yes, she is the wife of the great Sebastian Gorka, and I go on his radio show all the time, so I want Katie to come on my radio show. And so, Katie, thanks so much for joining.
Hey, I love being here. Thank you.
And I was asking about your affiliation, and you're obviously an author. You worked at the Heritage Foundation, but you said you are now the chairman of the Republican Party in Fairfax County?
Yeah, that's right. And I have Virginia. To say, before I was at Heritage, I was at the Department of Homeland Security. And, I spent my life looking at foreign threats, and I finally realized, actually, the threat's right here at home. So yes. I figured I need to get involved locally to save my country.
So Virginia is this is not the exact point of our conversation, but since we're talking about it, Virginia is a swing state. Trump thinks he can win Virginia. It's been a while since the Republicans have won Virginia at the national level. What do you think?
100%. And I think the fact that Robert Kennedy Jr. just threw his lot in with Trump, gives us even more, strength here in Fairfax County, here in Virginia. I think absolutely Fairfax and Virginia are in play. And I'll tell you part of the reason why. Fairfax has been going blue, but we've got a lot of legal immigrants. They are not happy with what's going on at the border. And I tell you what, I think they're going to be voting for Trump in force.
So you're in Fairfax County. Where do you live in Fairfax?
Yeah, I'm right in McLean.
McLean. Okay. So if I may, I'd love to ask you a question, because I lived in McLean for 15 or 16 years. We recently moved out of the McLean area. But when we were there, my son went to a high school called Thomas Jefferson High School. I think you can probably guess where this is going.
Yeah.
And so, when he went there, I mean, it's the top science and engineering school in the country, practically, and incredibly gifted and incredibly smart kids. And he got in and, did really well there, met a lot of people. But it was at that time, probably, I'm just guessing just from the people I would see in the parking lot, but at least 60% Asians. And so now they have all these quotas at Thomas Jefferson. And a lot of people are claiming it's not the same school that it was. And I just wonder if you have any observations about this.
Oh, yeah. This has been a very big point of contention. So Thomas Jefferson consistently ranked either first or second in the country. And it's, I think, now recently dropped down to 5 and probably going further. Yeah, Fairfax County has been at the front of the line when it comes to the, equity agenda. And it's really, and it's hurt not just Thomas Jefferson, it's hurt all our schools. There's been a lot of articles coming out recently because they're doing a major rezoning of boundaries in Fairfax County for the schools. And what one journalist has discovered, she's arguing that the reason that's happening is we have 5 of our high schools at risk of losing accreditation because they have so many illegals who are non-English speakers, and it's pulling everybody's scores down, it's pulling attendance rates down, and 5 schools might lose accreditation. So we've got big problems here in Fairfax County.
So, and by the way, I guess what they want to do is force some kids to go to those schools so they can lift up the... How is that fair? I mean, that's ridiculous.
Exactly.
Okay, so tell us about the book. You telling me it came out in April. It's called Next Gen Marxism, and you've written this, co-authored it with a good friend of mine, Mike Gonzalez, who's one of the smartest guys I know. So I was just reading the little excerpt from it, and I thought it was so interesting. It says the book Next Gen Marxism explains how it is not Soviet Marxism, but a Marxism that was shaped by European intellectuals, adapted and refined by America's student radicals in the 60s that have created these social ills. So what do you mean by that?
Oh, yeah. And I think it's so interesting, especially now with the Democrat convention having just taken place in Chicago, where protesters were saying, make it great like 68. Because you remember, right? There were major protests.
I grew up in Chicago and I was 8 years old, but I remember it's one of my first sort of political memories. I'm like, what the heck is going on? You could see the mayhem and the chaos and the violence in the streets. So I remember it. I remember it very well.
Yeah. So, initially, when Mike and I wrote the book, it was really because of the COVID shutdowns and what was happening in the schools. Yes. But, I think the things that we have seen since that time, particularly the protests on our college campuses, now the protests at the DNC, it just reinforces for us that Marxism, shockingly, has reared its ugly head again. And
well, how do you hold on? How do you define what is Marxism? Because I think a lot of people, our listeners, don't even know what I mean, they know it's probably a bad thing, but I don't think people really know what that means.
Right. Well, okay. So it was originally a purely sort of economic worldview. It said you have workers being exploited by owners, and that the workers would rebel, overthrow the owners, and that you would have a world run with sort of common ownership, and things would be much more equitable and more fair. Oh, and by the way, Marx also said, let's get rid of the family. Let's get rid of traditional marriage. He actually wanted a community of women that would be available to men. So he was one sick dude, okay? I will say that. What we're seeing today is today's Marxists have replaced that split between workers and owners, and today it's white people and white adjacent versus everybody else. Anybody who's a different ethnicity, a different sexual orientation, right? A different gender. But it's, the important thing about Marxism is it's a worldview that says the world is irreparably divided between oppressor and oppressed, and that we cannot make peace with each other.
So who, I get that. I know that about so who are the oppressors?
The white people, us.
The white people. Okay. Right. Yeah. Although we have people of all colors.
To be fair, and the white people and the quote white adjacent. So today it includes Asians and it generally includes Jewish people.
Right. So because Jews do very well at school and Asians do very well, I was wondering if they were oppressors too.
Oh, they are. Yes.
And who are the oppressed?
It's basically anybody else. It's basically anybody who's not white, anybody who is claims to be a different gender, anybody who's LGBT. I would say those are the oppressed.
So it's all really based on kind of racial terms more than class.
Yes. Well, yes. Oh, yeah. Exactly.
If you've got a black family that's very rich, could they be oppressors?
No. I'm sorry that they cannot. Nope.
Okay. And what about Hispanics who do really well? Are they oppressors?
No. And let's be clear. Very impoverished white people are still the oppressors, right?
Okay.
So the whole thing makes no sense. But that's what it is.
So what is it that they're after? In other words, I'm trying to figure out the mentality behind this because it seems pretty bizarre to me. So they're saying people are successful, and white are oppressors because they've worked hard and created great businesses and And then, the blacks and Hispanics are the people who've been oppressed. So what do we do about that?
Well, I have to be really clear because what they actually want is they want to overthrow the United States as it stands. They want a Marxist revolution. They want socialism.
Where has that ever worked?
Oh, that's just a small detail, really.
So they want Cuba, they want North Korea, they want East Germany. They want, they want Argentina, they want Venezuela. I mean, I don't really get. I'm not trying. I don't understand the mentality behind this because it'd be one thing to think, oh, that's an interesting idea, but they've tried it and it hasn't worked, and they still want to do it. But you
know what, Steve? The problem is we are not teaching that in our schools, and I'm convinced that's why young people are falling for this because they don't know what socialism has done.
Right. Right. I mean, the one of my favorite examples of this is in Chile. In Chile, which went free market in the 70s and 80s and 90s, became the richest country in South America. It went from one of the poorest to one of the richest. And the socialists and the Marxists hated that government. Even though people were getting richer, they hated it. And what they did, I don't know if you know this story, but they infiltrated the schools and the churches and the entertainment industry and all of the kind of talking professions, the media, and they kept talking about how oppressed people were, even as they were getting richer. And they finally succeeded. They overthrew the government. Now Chile's going in the wrong direction again.
I got to say, that's a really scary story because it sounds shockingly like what's happening in our country.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what they've done. They're so good at infiltrating the cultural institutions, the universities, the schools, the media. And that's why I wanted to have you on, because I'm so glad you're telling people, we've got to warn people, this is their strategy.
Oh, yeah. And especially now when you look at this ticket of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, I mean, right? I mean, he loves Maoist China. He thinks that's the model.
Yep. And they also want to now, they also want to tax us to death and they want to take everything away. Is that part of this Marxist doctrine, to take away from the rich and give it to the poor? Or?
Absolutely. Marxism is at heart a politics of envy.
Yeah. Yep. And instead of building yourself up to get ahead, you take it. It sounds like what they're saying is, instead of building yourself up and pulling, the old saying of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, instead of doing that, you just take it from people. Well,
and you pull the other person down.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're all equally in equal misery.
Yeah, there you go.
So what do we do to turn it around?
You vote for Donald Trump, for one thing.
Yeah, that would help. That would help. By the way, Katherine Gorka has been my guest, and she is wonderful. Her book is fantastic. And Katie, thanks so much for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.